In order to liberate all sentient beings, let's give rise to the Supreme Bodhicitta. And today our class is on the Shurangama Sutra. In fact, when I look at the Shurangama Sutra, it's rather long, and I'm not sure how long I will be able to finish giving the teaching of it. For the Vimalakirti Sutra, we used 2 years, and I think this one would then be longer than 2 years. It looks quite a lot. Anyhow, let's make the aspiration, and we have already made this aspiration, so let's try to finish and complete this. And since we've already made this aspiration, I really hope that you could spare the time to listen and study this sutra. And the best way of studying and listening to sutra is to start well and complete well. So I myself also made this aspiration to finish giving the teaching. Also, I am aware that impermanence could dawn at any moment, and I could die at any moment. But I myself had made the aspiration, if the impermanence of death does not dawn on me, then I will continue the teaching of the Shurangama Sutra. Right now, in the sutra, we are at the part where the Buddha gave a teaching of the 7 attempts of searching for the mind. This is quite important. In fact, we can look at it as a Vajrayana teaching, because it is a pointing out instruction. It is a pointing out of the nature of mind instruction. In fact, Phuntsog Rinpoche gave a teaching, a commentary on the pointing out of the nature of mind, composed by Mipa Rinpoche. Phuntsog Rinpoche stated once that this is quite an important text. He taught it once, and I myself translated it before, and earlier I've translated it again to make the language more understandable. Phuntsog Rinpoche composed a prologue before, at the beginning of my translation of the pointing out of the nature of mind. He stated that there are different ways of observing the nature of mind, and the way that he pointed out the instructions of watching the nature of mind is in fact rather quite similar to the 7 attempts of searching for the mind. In terms of the commentary of the Shurangama Sutra, I think some of the masters didn't really compose a very detailed explanation based on the 7 attempts. However, I think we should try to watch our mind instead of just looking at different kind of commentaries. Master Jiaguang and different masters, in terms of their commentaries, are a little bit different, and their point of views are a bit different. How is it different then? It differs from the way that they look at the different perspective of the 7 attempts of searching for the mind. Master Jiaguang stated that the 7 attempts are looking for the place of abiding of the mind, and after the 7 attempts, it started to state about the deluded mind. You have to then find the conceptual mind and deluded mind. So that's how he looked at this instruction. But according to a different master, he said that the previous ones are about the pervasive Dharma phenomena, and then the later part started talking about the dependent origination. And Master Chang Shui praised Master Oyi's opinion. where he said that as long as we recognize the nature of the mind, or rather the main part of the teaching of where the mind is, then it is just like you have already destroyed the place of the abiding of the mind. Then you don't have to look for other places anymore. Just as if you were to find where the mind generates, or not finding where the mind generates, then you don't really have to look further for other places of where the mind is. And in such a way, you can directly destroy the delusion of the mind. Sometimes some of the masters give the teaching of the Tiantai school of point of view, and some of them started talking about the dependent origination aspect. And for example, Master Jiao Guang, he stated from the perspective of where the mind is and the coming and going of the mind. It's similar to the Vajrayana teaching and more close to the Ati's way of looking for the mind. So the 7 attempts of searching for the mind, I think some people feel that because all sentient beings have this grasping towards the mind, therefore they started to talk about where the abiding or the nature or the substance of the mind from the perspective of the all-pervasive habitual pattern of the grasping of sentient beings. And at the beginning, we've already talked about how the mind is not outside, it's not inside, it's not in the middle. And the 4th one talks about how the mind neither looks in nor outside, and mainly on the inside, and it doesn't look inside either. And from all of these perspectives, we can see, in fact, in Shurangama Sutra, on one hand, we can use the observation or analysis that is used in the Buddhist logic. So you continuously ask the questions to look for where the mind is, and then eventually you'll be able to find that in fact there is no substance. There is the mind is in fact nowhere to be found. So Ananda continuously to pose questions, and the Buddha continuously to answer his question. So Ananda over here is just like how a scholar would pose questions. The scholars would ask questions like if the mind is outside, if the mind is inside, if the mind is in the middle, and they're trying to point that the mind has a substance, and if it has substance, then how it manifests such kind of substance, how it works with such kind of substance. So I think this kind of questions are quite important, because we can't have blind faith. We have to have faith, but the faith that we have should be built on wisdom. It cannot be built completely up on blind faith or blindness. Otherwise, it is superstition rather than faith. So our faith should be built up on detailed analysis and observation. And then when you come with the definitive answer for yourself, then you'll be able to build a definitive view for yourself, and you'll be able to be very certain about your view and your faith. So throughout the whole process of looking for the mind, I really hope that you should look at the mind in the way that is more than scholastic way, or looking at this whole text with an eye of looking for mistakes. This morning, I was talking to a manager, and we were looking at the photograph. At that time, the manager was looking at the photo with a scrutinizing eye, and he kept on criticizing the he kept on criticizing the video and the pictures. He started to pointing out that, oh, someone's dozing off, someone's looking at the cell phone, and someone's really distracted, someone's wearing a hat. But I myself, when I was looking at it, I thought that the sculpture is really beautiful in that picture, and the person even wearing the hat is is also showing veneration. I started. When I was looking at the photograph, I looked at it from a very positive way, but when he looked at the photograph, he looked at it from a criticizing perspective and scrutinizing all the mistakes. In fact, I think this is how we should look at the text. In fact, I'm not praising myself by saying that I look at everything with positivity. I'm just saying that people have very different perspective, and we ourselves should look at our own intention and our own mentality when we are studying the sutra. I know lots of you are quite smart, and you have you gained lots of knowledge in your school, and you're very scholarly in many aspects. You've studied through high school, university, and got scholarships all the way through master's and even PhD. And if you were to use your wisdom to only scrutinize the mistakes within the sutras, in such a way, I think your studying of the Dharma won't succeed. So we should then look at the sutra with an attitude of faith. Then in this way, you will be able to build up your you'll be able to succeed in the Dharma study. And there are people who just follow blindly, who have rather a superstition than faith with wisdom. So I think for such kind of people, it's quite important to develop the skills of analysis and more wisdom. In such a way, your faith will be grounded. So you can't be on the two extremes. Anyhow, there's a story that there's a book that's composed by Master Fa Xian, the journey to the countries of the Buddha. And journey to the country of the Buddha. In fact, in that journey, in that journal that he composed, it says that he held incense and flowers, and he was at the Vulture's Peak, and he was making offerings of the flowers of incense and the lamps along with other bhikshus. And at that time, he remembered this is the place where the Buddha gave the teaching of Shurangama Sutra. And upon thinking this, he started getting really emotional, and he started to cry. He thought that this is the place where the Buddha gave the teaching of such a profound sutra. However, now it is only left with these sites, and he himself never had the opportunity and the merit to listen to the teaching. And he stayed in the cave over there around the Vulture's Peak for one night. In that journey to the country of the Buddha, in fact, it is stated that the dates that Master Fa Xian looked at the sutra over there were earlier than the actual translation that was translated into Chinese language. So the translation was 750 CE, and Master Fa Xian's date was around 3 to 4 century CE. So he must have then looked or read into the Shurangama Sutra. And another version stated that the text that he read over there was probably the Shurangama Samadhi Sutra. So it is probably a different sutra that is read and chanted by Master Fa Xian. And on top of that, the Vulture Peak is a little bit far from the Jata Grove, which was where Buddha gave the teaching of Surangama Sutra. It is also possible that the Buddha gave teaching of a sutra in various places, and then it was later then compiled into one sutra. So that could also be possible. So it could be the Shurangama Samadhi Sutra, or it could be the Sanskrit version of the Shurangama Sutra, because Master Fa Xian went abroad at the age of 65 and started to study the Sanskrit language, and then maybe at that time the text that he read at the time was the Sanskrit version of Shurangama Sutra. So it could be either ways. I think when we're studying some text, we should then read extensively so that we can gather lots of information and we can make connections of certain information. Anyhow, I just wanted to share the story of Master Fa Xian, who then chanted the Shurangama Sutra at Vulture's Peak or Shurangama Samadhi Sutra at Vulture's Peak. It could be either way. Now let's move on to the fifth attempt of searching out of the seven. Previously, we've already learned that mind is not out, it's not inside, is not looking inside or outside. And now Ananda started to say to the Buddha, said that I have heard the Buddha instruct the four assemblies that because the mind Buddha in fact addressed and instructed the assemblies that because the mind arises, then every kind of Dharma, every kind of phenomena then arises, and that because Dharma arises, then every kind of mind arises. So the Dharma here refers to all kinds of phenomena that disappears outside, the variety of manifestations and appearances that is on the outside. Because all of the phenomena in fact manifest from mind, then it is because of that mind then all phenomena would appear outside. And because of all kinds of Dharma would arise on the outside, then every kind of mind arises. For example, when you see something really lovely and cute, then you will have the desire that arises in your mind. And if there were something that is quite annoying, then you would probably have this kind of anger arise in your mind. And if you were to say something venerable outside, then you have the mind of admiration arise. So all kinds of things arise from the outside your mind. All kinds of mind would also arise. And then Ananda started to say that as I now consider it, so Ananda said that I've been thinking about it. He said that the substance of that very consideration is truly the nature of mind. So he said that, well, after consideration, there must be a mind. Wherever it comes together with things, then the mind exists in response. So there has to be the maturation of the cause and conditions, and in such a way, then the phenomena and the mind would arise. So before, as Ananda learned from the Buddha, saying that since the mind does not exist outside or inside, then he started to make this consideration, saying that, well, then the mind must then exist in response to the manifestation or the existence of the external phenomena. So he started to say then it must be that when the causes and conditions are both there, then the mind would also arise. So Ananda thinks that, in fact, the mind has substance, because Ananda did not understand that everything is illusory, everything is dreamlike. He grasped onto the existence of the mind or the phenomena. He felt that there's definitely something that is the solid substance that exists, that is just like how the scholars nowadays would think how mind or a phenomena exists. And in such a way, he felt that there's no way for him to. In fact, at that time, Ananda did not really understand the illusory aspect or the dreamlike aspect of both mind and phenomena. So over here, he said that I think everything that appears based on the coming together of things. In Madhyamika, it talks about how the causes and conditions mature, or anywhere that is meet with causes and conditions, then there could be fruition. It's not like that at all. In fact, Ananda thinks that there is a solid existing substance, that is the mind. So at that time, the Buddha then said to Ananda, saying that, now you say that because Dharma arises, every kind of mind arises. Wherever it comes together with things. So the Buddha started to refute him. In fact, in the sutra, it's not so easy to find where the refutation is. But over here, the Buddha asked him questions. So he asked this question. It says that wherever it comes together with things, the mind exists in response, isn't it? But if it has no substance, the mind cannot come together with anything. So Buddha asked that, do you think the mind exists as something that has substance? But so first of all, if the mind doesn't have substance, then the mind cannot come together or combine with anything. Previously, Ananda stated that, well, mind and phenomena comes as a cause and conditions, and in such a way the mind arises as a substance. And in such a way, then it won't happen. Why is that? Because then, if having no substance, it can yet come together with things that would constitute a 19th realm brought about by union with the 7th defiling object. In fact, there are only the 18 realms, and there is no 19th realm, just like how there is no horns for a rabbit. And if the mind is just like the horn of a rabbit that doesn't exist, then how can you say that it could mix with other phenomena? And if you were to say that the mind doesn't have any substance, then it's just like that you're talking about the 7th defiling object, because there are only 6 defiling objects, and now you're making up a 7th defiling object, and that is not possible, because when with the direct cognition, you cannot perceive it. And there is no such principle, and in such a way this is not possible. So that's the first refutation by the Buddha. The second refutation of the Buddha goes, if it does have substance, when you pinch your body with your hand, or if you were to touch your body, I think in some commentaries as a pinch, but in the Tibetan and the Chinese translation, it only talks about touching or in touch with your body by your hand. At that time, when you touch, then your body will definitely have a sense, will definitely feel it. Wherever your hand touches, then it will feel it on your body. And if it has such a feeling, does your mind which perceive it come out from the inside or from the outside? Does this kind of sense come from the inside of your body, or does this kind of feeling come from the outside of the body? So once you have the feeling, then the mind that feels it, does it comes from the inside of your body or outside of your body? If it comes from the inside, then you've made a mistake, because once again, it should see within your body. It should be able to then perceive whatever are organs and whatever things that you have in your body, isn't it? We've already talked about it in the fourth refutation, so you cannot say that. And the second is that the second refutation within this is that if it comes from the outside, then you should be able to see your face first. If your mind is this knowing mind comes from the outside, then the mind should also be able to see your face first. But this is not possible either. Because if you were to see your own face, then you have to look into a mirror, or your consciousness get out of your body and flying half in the air and then look back at your body. Then that's how you can see your face and perceive your own face. So over here, the Buddha talks from the two aspects. Does mind have a substance, and does mind this substance of mind comes from inside or outside the body? And then Ananda said that no, this is not what I meant. Ananda said that in fact seeing is done with the eyes, and consciousness and seeing is different. We usually say that whatever we see is the truth. So he said that seeing is done with the eyes. The mind's perception is not that of the eyes. To say it sees doesn't make the sense. So his point was that when you're looking, then you're looking with your eyes. So he's saying that when you see, you don't really see with your mind, you see it with your eyes. So that's what is Ananda trying to differentiate. Therefore, when Buddha stated that if your mind is within or looking from outside, you should be able to see your own face or see the inside of your body, that doesn't make sense. So that's Ananda's clarification from his point of view. But the Buddha did not make a mistake as how Ananda assumed. The Buddha then said that to suppose that the eyes can see is like supposing that the doors of a room can see. So he said that, well, you think the eyes can see, isn't it? Then, since you're sitting in the room, your eyes are just like a door of a room. Could the doors see? As we stated before, the eyes are just like the crystals. And over here, the Buddha then used this analogy of the eyes are just like a door. And a person, that is the mind, sitting inside of the room, and the doors are the eyes. Then, do you see with your mind or your eyes? Also, if you were to say that it is the eye faculty that sees, then when someone has died, but his eyes are still intact and perfectly well, then his eyes should be able to see things, isn't it? And if the person who sees with the eye faculty, it is just like that you're saying that the doors could see, and a person who has died could also see. And if a person who's already dead and his eyes are still have this capacity of seeing, then how can it be death if one can still see? So if you were to say that the eyes are have the capacity to see, then you're saying that if someone who has already died could still use the eye faculty to see. In fact, this kind of analysis and this kind of argument is very similar to those of arguments made in Madhyamika and Buddhist logic, the Pramana teachings. If you were to say that the eye faculties are the ones who can perceive, then the ones who have the eye faculty should be able to see. If you were to say that you can both has both capacities of seeing and not seeing, then in such a way, you cannot say that you cannot say that, oh, this is something that this person could see and then not see at the same time, or it comes in phases. It's just like saying that a person in fact, this is a refutation made to argue with those of people who hold the existentialism view, where they see that everything exists as a materialistic existence, are the ones who could perceive. Then in such a way, you're just saying that the eye faculty are the ones who could perceive. And how about at the time when eyes cannot perceive? So you cannot really make such argument. And in such a way, it is in fact quite difficult to argue with. Back in 1999, until the time Phuntsok Rinpoche passed into parinirvana, I translated simultaneously for him. Sometimes when Phuntsok Rinpoche was giving the story halfway through, I've already finished the whole story because I'm very familiar with those stories. But sometimes when Phuntsok Rinpoche gives a rather very foreign arguments and very foreign stories, and when some terms came up that I don't know how to translate, then I would get really lost. So simultaneous translation, on one hand, you don't have to wait for the translator to translate afterwards. You don't have to wait for the consecutive translation. However, simultaneous translation also have its flaws. Therefore, I'm not sure if the translators had made the pramana analysis clearly to all of you. Ananda, if your knowing mind has substance, is that substance single or manifold? If your mind, which is aware, understands and knows, in fact has substance, then is it a single substance or many substances? The pramana or the analysis is in fact very similar to the previous one, so the logic is very similar. So he started to refute Ananda in 4 aspects. The first one is that is it one or only? Is the substance of mind is one or many? And does the substance perceive the body as it now resides in it, or does it not perceive it? And this mind that you perceive has. Is it everywhere, or is it only at one place? So there are many ways of looking at it. So he started saying that when your hand is touching your foot, at that moment, if it were one, then you must have feel that your hand is touching all of your 4 limbs, just as if your hand is really cold and touching your other limbs. Then at that moment, your 4 limbs should all have the feeling of feeling cold. But how we in fact feel is that if one hand is touching another part of the limb, you probably would feel that it's cold on that certain part and not on the other limbs, isn't it? But according to the Buddha's refutation, if the mind is one, then you'll be able to perceive all of the feelings all together, because there's only one mind. Then you can't differentiate how the mind is over here at the hand or the different limbs. If you were to only touch your hand, if you were to only touch one part of the limb or other people's limb, then at the place of touching, you will feel you have certain feelings, but not any other places. So it is definitely wrong to say that there's only one whole substance of mind that is pervasive all over the body. If your whole body have these feelings, because the body doesn't have this one feeling, therefore your proposal is wrong. Because wherever you would touch, you would feel the feelings at that particular place. So that's the first aspect of the refutation posed by the Buddha. Now the second, if this mind has many folds, it is not possible either, because if in such a way, then you're just saying that you have many minds. If you were to have many minds, then you're no longer one person, you're of many people in you. Then that's also not possible. If you were to say that your mind is manifold, you have a mind on your mind, on your limbs, and on your body, and so on. And in such a way, you're really saying that in one of your body, then it is split into many minds and therefore many people, and that is not possible either. You cannot point to which part of you is you. You cannot point to whether person A or mind A, B, C, D, E is you. Can you point to exactly which part is you then? That is also not possible. The third one, it started saying that if the mind is all pervasive all over the body, is not possible either. Because if the mind is all pervasive over the body, then it is the same as the previous argument. Then all your limbs should be having the same feeling at the same moment when you touch just one part. So that's not possible. I will then further elaborate of the feelings later after this part. The next one started saying that in fact the mind is only at one part. It is not all pervasive, but it is only at a certain part. But this is also not possible, because if I were to touch the top of your head and your foot at the same time, then do you only feel the touching at the head? Do you only feel my touching at your head, or both at your head and your foot then? Because your mind could only be at one place if there was a solid substance of mind, because it could only be at one place at a time. If you were touched by different kind of places, or at different kinds of places, just as when you're doing examinations, medical examinations, where you would have different tapes on your fingers, on your limbs, on your head, and on your knees, and so on. And then at that time, your mind should only feel one place that is then intact with your body, and you won't be able to feel the different sense of touches at the different places, isn't it? The neuroscience, in fact, they talk about how there are neurons, and there's a different kind of neurons would produce information and would produce different signals, and then transmute such signals. I think their way of looking at mind is different than Buddhism. In the commentary of Pramana, it talks about, in fact, the faculties could have the consciousness of different six faculties. They could then produce such kind, or they could feel at the same time. However, your deluded mind, that is thought, could only produce one thought at a time. So information could happen at the same time. Information could be received at the same time. You could then feel different kind of feelings at the same time. For example, if you were to have a headache at the same time you are having foot-ache, then such kind of information could be received. However, your mind could only feel, or could only produce the thought of I am in pain, I am having headache at this one instant, and then the next instant you could shift your thought to, oh, I'm having foot-ache as well. So it happens rather one thought at a time, rather than receiving all the information all at the same time. In Mipa Rinpoche's teaching, it is stated that, in fact, it doesn't matter how many objects there are on the outside, the perceiving capacities would also be there to receive all the information from the external objects. So all the senses that we have could perceive all the senses from the outside. For example, we can look at something really beautiful. At the same time, we can feel our senses from our body. However, we cannot generate two kinds of thoughts at the same time, where maybe you're grasping towards the external object with your eye consciousness, but you cannot grasp that at the same time with your touches or your hearing senses and other senses. So Buddhism, in fact, is very logical. When the neuroscience talks about the receiving of the information, I think they have their areas of studies. However, when it comes to the consciousness and how our thoughts would grasp and how the consciousness work with the senses, then I think it is only Buddhism could explain that. We cannot produce jealousy at the same time with the kindness. And in fact, the mind has rather, I think in terms of how mind works and how thoughts are produced, I think it is the best to study Buddhist logic. I saw lots of our practitioners wanted to study Buddhism logic as well as Abhidharma, and the way I take it is that it's the most important to study Madhyamika. Of course, it is important to study the knowledge of Abhidharma and the Buddhism logic. I notice a majority of you applied to study Abhidharma. This is fine, and in fact, Madhyamika, in my opinion, would be more important to study. I think all the 5 treatises are very important, and we should all have firm ground and foundations to study. We should be able to understand the mind and and all of these kind of teachings on mind are taught within Buddhist logic and Abhidharma, and the teachings on them are rather quite similar. So anyhow, it says that if you were to touch one part of your body, then you won't be able to hear the other parts of the body, which is not true. If you were to touch different places, then you would have different feelings at different places. You will feel different sense perceptions that you would feel the different senses of touching from different places, but at that one single time, you cannot have 2 different kinds of thoughts. So as previously how I stated, mind is not the production of cause and conditions. So that's the 5th one. The text that I have over here is the Emperor's edition, the Qianlong Emperor's edition of Shurangama Sutra, and at the beginning of it, this version actually is printed in the Yonghe Palace in Beijing, and it looks like that. At the beginning of it, it has the prologue that is composed by Emperor Qianlong, and I think some of the content of the prologue are the same, both in Chinese and Tibetan language, but the Chinese version is very difficult to understand. But the Tibetan version of this prologue is rather much easier to understand. So over here, I would like to just briefly share this prologue with you. So over here, it says that it expressed that Emperor Qianlong Emperor Qianlong stated that the majority of the Tripitakas are already in the Tibetan language, as Tibet is the center of between India and China for the Dharma teachings, for Dharma's for the Dharma. And Shurangama Sutra, however, Shurangama Sutra is not one of them. Shurangama Sutra is not included in the Tibetan language. Why is that? It is in fact because of Lama destroyed Buddhism at the time. He used the method of burning and burying the sutra texts. Therefore, the text is lost in the Tibetan language. And Master Bhutan, who then made the prediction saying that after 500 years, the Tibetan version will be translated from Chinese language into the Tibetan language. And this was read by Qianpo Sodargye, who was the country's master Zhangjia at that time. Not sure if it was in Sanskrit, but the book that was read by Qianpo Sodargye, it described that this version would be then translated back into Tibetan language. And then Emperor Qianlong stated that, in fact, he got really busy with lots of the country affairs, the state affairs. However, whenever he gets any of the spare time for himself, he would then translate lots of the Chinese classics that is written in Chinese language into Manchurian. Also, upon contemplating that his grandfather, who was also not emperor, translated the Heart Sutra into 4 different languages, or kept the Heart Sutra into 4 different languages, and then at that time, his father also did the same. So, because of their good example, he also wanted to translate the Shurangama Sutra into 4 different languages, just as what his grandfather did for the Heart Sutra. But Heart Sutra was already translated into Tibetan language at that time, but Shurangama Sutra was not. Therefore, he decided to translate the Shurangama Sutra from Chinese language into Manchurian, and from Manchurian language into Mongolian language, and from Mongolian language into Tibetan language. And in such a way, he would fulfill the prediction that is made by Master Bhutan at that time. So he asked his relative, as well as Qianpo Sodargye and a minister at that time, whose name is Furei, to study and to translate the Shurangama Sutra. And at the end of each volume or each chapter of the Shurangama Sutra, they have to send the text to the Emperor Qianlong, so that Qianlong would then read over their translation. Whatever question he would come up with at that time, he would then consult with Qianpo Sodargye at that time. So the translation was finished within 11 years, all the way from 1952 to 1763. And at that time, the relative asked his relative asked Emperor Qianlong to write a prologue. And upon writing a prologue, Emperor Qianlong started to think that, in fact, the Shurangama Sutra is a profound teaching that is given by Shakyamuni Buddha. And because of such profundity, if the translation is very difficult to understand, then in such a way it would be rather difficult for people to uptake and to understand. There are monks who fight over for small wordings, for different ways of descriptions, for things that's rather unnecessary. Therefore, based on Emperor Qianlong's understanding, he felt that it is quite necessary to make sure that people could understand the Shurangama Sutra easily. This is the principle that he required the translators. So he said that it is just like that you should gift food to the hungry and gift drinks to the thirsty, and in such a way the translation should be just like that, rather than making it really fancy and not fulfilling. Therefore, he asked the translators to translate without flowery wording and directly pointing to the meaning of the text. In such a way, the teaching would be useful and would be beneficial to the later generation. And he felt that this should be the way how the royal family should continue to propagate the sutras. And this prologue was composed back in 1763. October 18th. This was just my oral translation, and it was not really composed. I really hope that whenever you are doing your post-class discussion group, you should really read this, and you should think about how the previous royal families, the kings and the ministers, invested lots of time and energy into the teachings and the sutras of the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha. So now let's move to the sixth one, the sixth attempt of looking for the mind. Let's finish it today. Over here, then Ananda said to the Buddha, he continued to pose the question to the Buddha. He said that a world-honored one also have heard the Buddha discuss the true appearance with Manjushri and other great disciples, other great bodhisattvas. And during the discussion of the ultimate truth, I've heard that you, world-honored one, has also said the mind is not inside and it's not outside. And now, as I consider it, if it were within, it would see things it does not see. If it were outside, if it were inside, then it would see things it does not see, such as the bowels and stomach and all the organs within. If it were outside, then there would be no common perception. Different commentaries by Master Changshui, Master Jiaoguang, in their explanation, where it talks about there is nothing. It could see things it does not see, and on the outside there will be no common perceptions. I think their translations are rather a little bit different in Chinese, but the meaning is not much of a difference. Since it cannot see inside, you cannot see the organs, isn't it? It cannot be inside. Over here, Ananda started to explain the teaching of the Buddha, saying that because you cannot see what's inside, then it cannot be inside. And since the body and the mind have common perception, rather than saying that it is two minds, two big shoes that does not know each other, does not then have the common perception of each other. So it does not make sense to say that it is outside. Therefore, since there is a common perception and since there is no seeing within, it must be in the middle. Previously, the Buddha already refuted the proposal of Ananda, saying that the mind is within. And then also already refuted Ananda's idea, saying that the mind is outside. So at that time, then Ananda started to say that this must be in the middle. And then in the middle part, Ananda also leaning towards that middle, closer to the outside part. So let's now look at this. It is not inside, it is not outside, but it is somewhere on the outside, but also in the middle. That's his point of view. And now the Buddha started to refute him. According to Master Oi's commentary, he said that the mind is not outside, not inside. And then Ananda must have this perception that the mind has a true substance that resides somewhere in the middle, somewhere within. He grasped onto that the mind has a true substance, has a true characteristic. Just as I think how majority of people, they also hold on to that there is a true existence of mind. In fact, the mind in the relative truth, it is dreamlike and illusion-like, but in its ultimate reality, it is not existent at all. It is completely empty. And then over here, the Buddha replied to Ananda, saying that you say it is in the middle, then you cannot be so vague about it. You have to make it very clear. If you were to say that it's in the middle, then you have to find a fixed location for it. You have to find somewhere very specific for it. Because if it's in the middle, then you're pointing to a specific location, and you cannot say that there's nowhere to be found in the middle. When people talk about middle, we usually would think about it is sandwiched between inside and outside. It must be sandwiched between one and the other. So over here, the Buddha started to ask that, then where is the middle that you're proposing? Is it in an external place? Is it in the middle of a pillar? Is it in between two places? Is it in between Nepal and India? Is it in between Yunnan and Sichuan province? Or is it in the body? Is it somewhere sandwiched between the faculty and another body part? If you were to say that it is in the middle of the body, it could not be on the surface of the body since it is not the middle. Because if you were to say that it's somewhere on the skin, somewhere in between the skin, that's on the outside of the body. If you were to say that the mind is somewhere attached to the body on the outside, then that is on the outside of the body. If you were to say that this is somewhere inside of the body, if you were to say that is inside of your flesh, inside of your bone, inside of your organ, then it goes back to the previous logic that we've already discussed. So it doesn't work. Then, is it in the middle of your body? Is it in the middle of somewhere else? If it were somewhere outside, I think it is the best for people who have studied the Buddhist logic to study this. Otherwise, you'll get completely lost. For me, myself, this is easy. For people who studied Buddhist logic, I think you have lots of faith and lots of enthusiasm. And I noticed that lots of people who studied the Buddhist logic and the way when they were doing their after-class presentation, they were very happy. They were almost jumping up during their presentation. Anyhow, if you were to say that it is in the middle of some place, then could you find a reference? Could you find a reference point? Could you find a fixed location? Could you find a point, a reference point? Is there a reference point? Because if you were to say that there is no reference point, then you were to say that it is just like the son of a barren woman that doesn't exist. Or if you were to say that it is in the middle of the two dharmas that doesn't exist, then you were to say that this so-called fixed location is just like the space. And if you were to say that it is at the place of the marker of the reference point, then let's contemplate on the reference point, because people make the reference point with their references, because we have to. Because if you were to say that this is the middle and this is your reference point, but you are. But when regarded from the east, it would be to the west, and when regarded from the south, it would be the north. If we were to place a reference point on the east, then we would say that this is between the east and the west. But for Westerners, they would feel that it's rather on the east. But for people from the south, they would feel that it's actually on the north. Over here, when we talk about the Americans as Westerners, they would say that I'm not a Westerner. In fact, you're on the west side of me. Especially when we look at the globe as a sphere, we cannot say that this is definitively on the west of you or on the east of you. The reference point also moves. There is no fixed point for a reference point. If we were to have a if we were to have a fixed point, a fixed reference point, then we cannot make any of the references anymore. So everything is really changeable because we're using reference points because we're using individual reference points, and that is not fixed. And if you were to say that the west and east, or if you were to set any kind of reference point to make a mark for yourself, then it could make everyone else really confused, because everyone's reference points are very different. There's no definitive reference point. So that's the first refutation. And the second refutation is that, then Ananda started to explain for himself. He said that the middle I speak of is neither of those. As the world-honored one has said, the eyes and forms are of the conditions which create eye consciousness. The eyes makes discriminations. Form has no perception, but a consciousness is created between them, and this is where my mind is. This statement is rather from the Buddhist logic and Abhidharma. So when eyes and forms are the conditions which create the eye consciousness, in fact, eye faculty doesn't have any it doesn't have any discriminations. Eye consciousness doesn't have any discriminations. It is only that the conceptual mind that makes the discriminations. But over here, it says that the eye doesn't have a discrimination. The forms on the outside, it doesn't have any discriminations. this kind of teachings, this kind of ideas are then detailedly refuted in the wisdom chapter of Bodhisattva Charyavatara, as well as the commentary on the Pramana. In fact, Ananda, since he is the foremost in listening to the Dharma and extensive in learning, but he grasp onto certain things, and he used his conceptual mind to he used lots of his conceptual mind and not really truly understand the meanings. Just as he quoted from the Buddha, and later he would quote Purna, and he quoted the teaching of the Buddha to the Bodhisattvas, and he read a lot and he heard a lot, but the details of the teachings are not grasped, but the essence of the teaching is not really understood by Ananda, just like the scholars nowadays. I really hope that the scholars are not like Ananda. See, he thinks that between the form and eyes, and there is, in the middle of that, there's a consciousness. In fact, he doesn't really understand what he's saying, and the Buddha started to refute him. In this part, I really hope you could focus, otherwise it's quite difficult to understand. It says that, in fact, between the I and object, there is, if you were to think that your mind is in the middle of the I and an object, it's between the I and an object, then does the mind's substance combine with the two or doesn't? Since your mind is in the middle, then does your mind mix or combine or cling to the I or the object? In the Tibetan translation, it says that does the mind then make a connection to the I, or does the mind makes the connection to the object that the I perceives? If the mind did combine with both of them, then object and mind substance would form a chaotic mixture. Since object has no perception, while the substance has perception, the two would stand in opposition. Which is the middle? Could you find where the middle is? Why is that? Because the mind has a connection or has a relationship with the I and has a relationship with object. And then the mind must have both the element of object and elements of the I. And then all three are mixed, but these two would stand in opposition. How could then have any kind of relationship? You should think upon this, because majority of the time we would consider that the object truly exists, and our eyes are existent, and between our eyes and the object there is a mind. For people who studied Abhidharma, they would feel that this is impossible. This is definitely impossible, because the eyes as the cause and then the object as a condition, then over there, because of the cause and condition, then you'll be able to see. But then over here, Ananda is saying that in the middle of I and in the middle between the I and object, there is the mind. How could that be possible? And Ananda's idea is that the mind has partially that is the mind and partially that is the object. So you have partial. So the mind is partially the perceiver and partially the perceived. In fact, for the kind of people who grasp onto solid existence, that's how they perceive. And in such a way, then everything would be very chaotically mixed. You're mixing up everything together. Because your mind is then mixed with the I and with the object. All three are all mixed together. And in such a way, you can't really differentiate where is the consciousness and where is the mind and where is the I, where is the object. Is the mind, is the I a mind? Is the I an object? Is the I an inanimate subject, object? So if all of them are mixed together, then this doesn't make any sense. If it were mixed together, since object has no perception while substance has perception, then the two would stand in opposition. Then it can't happen at all. You can't find even the middle, and everything would be mixed together. The next one is that if it did not combine with the two, it would then be neither perceiver nor perceived and would have no substance or nature. Because the object is not is not the I, and the mind is not mixed with neither the I nor the object. It is not mixed with any, and then how could you say? Where would the characteristic of middle be? How could you say there's a middle? It's quite easy to differentiate the I and object. Between these two, is there a mind? And how can you mix all three together? If the I and object doesn't have any relationships, then the mind would be a solid or would be isolated existence in the middle, and it doesn't make any connections. Did you understand? It's okay if you don't understand. I can't do much because I've already tried my best to explain it to you. We've finished, right? So over here, therefore, you should know that for the mind to be in the middle is impossible. What are you laughing at? You do not understand.